starting a new job. So I show up the very first day, and the person at the front desk tells me that my manager is not going to be in today. And Joe, the person that's assigned to help me, well, he's not in yet either. So I ended up waiting in the lobby for maybe about half an hour. When Joe finally shows up, he apologizes for the mix-up. He thought I was going to come in later. And as we walk in, he shows me the break room. And as we're getting a coffee, he tells me, you know, Stephen, unfortunately, your laptop, your desk space, they're not yet ready. But I was able to get you a temporary setup. Hopefully, your laptop and desk will be ready in probably about a day or two. So as we walk down this long row of depressing looking cubes to a dark far corner of the building, I see a space that's filled with stacks of old phones and keyboards and other IT equipment. It also has this really small desk with this crusty old looking computer. And it's just like, well, this is your temporary setup. I know it's not much, but it's the best we can do for now. And as we try to get my computer started, he tells me, you have a 15-minute call set up with your manager at 3 in the afternoon. She's super hard to get a hold of. Now, once we figure out how to log in, he shows me where I can find this stack of procedures and mandatory HR training to work through. And he says, I have to run for a meeting, call or message me if you have any questions. Joe disappears. And before I know it, it's 10 a.m. And I'm sitting there all by myself, questioning my life's decisions. So what do you think? How did I feel at that moment? Using the Happy Stephen scale, patent pending, how did I feel? Well, I felt I was not important to them. I felt I was a nuisance getting in the way of people. And I felt completely deflated. All the excitement of starting a new job, it's gone instantly. So the question is, was this intentional? Do you think they set out to give me a miserable experience? Well, no, of course not. They didn't. It's completely unintentional. This is what I call an unintended negative experience. Hi, Stephen. I'm a coach. I help professionals like you and me on their leadership and career journey. And today, these are the topics we're going to cover. We'll talk about why negative experiences play such an important role, what's behind it, and what can we do about it. But before we dive in, I just have one more question. How focused do you plan to be? On a scale of 1 to 7, where 7 is you get your notepad ready, you're completely dialed in, you're ready to go. And 1 is something just completely blew up on one of your projects, you're in firefighting mode, doing 3 things at a time. And if that's the case, I feel for you. I know, I've been there. Go take care of things, come back, watch the recording later. Right? My guess is most of you are somewhere in the middle. And I would ask you, can you just make one small adjustment to get you closer to where you want to be? I know for me, especially in these type of virtual settings, it's very tempting to have like a separate screen going with my email messaging and so on. Really, it can be anything for anybody else, right? We're going to cover a lot of ground. So if you want to get the most out of the next half hour, do yourself a favor and just make one small adjustment to get more focused. All right, let's dive in. Let's look at motivation. Dan Pink wrote this book, Drive, The Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us. In this, he states that after basic needs like food and shelter are met, there's really 3 things that motivate us. Purpose, mastery, and autonomy. And it's a combination of these 3 that leads to what he calls drive. Purpose is the desire to work on things that matter, to serve something that's bigger than ourselves. Mastery is to get better at something that matters to you. For instance, becoming a better project manager. And autonomy is the desire to direct our lives and be in control of your own destiny. So let's do a fun little experiment. Let's get evil. In this experiment, your goal is to demotivate people as much as possible using these 3 elements. Let's have some fun with it. I'll do the first one, purpose, but then for mastery, autonomy, I want you to write your answers in the Q&A box, and we'll talk about it at that time. Okay, so purpose. As a reminder, it's desire to work on things that matter. How can you use purpose to demotivate people? Well, as a leader, show long and complicated slide decks on company mission and strategy and goals, but make sure it's super high level, very vague, and full of corporate speak. See, the goal is really to make sure that people cannot make a connection between their day-to-day work and the bigger picture. You can also create a set of company values and behaviors for people to live by. But again, make sure they're vague, they're very fluffy. Things like integrity, communication, respect, and excellence. These are all really great things, but it's so broad, it's so generic, which means it really loses any meaning. In addition,
Sorry, can you hear Steve? Sorry, Steve. Can everyone hear him? Oh, I can't hear him. I can't hear anyone. Uh,
It looks like we can't hear each other.
now we do.
Okay,
Hear you now.
the audio is back. Stephen, can you say something?
hello, can you hear
Okay,
me?
yes, the audio
we
is back. I don't know what happened. I apologize to you, Stephen, and to
No
our
worries.
attendees. Let's go ahead and pick up where we left.
So where did I lose people?
You lost audio as soon as you got to the integrity, communication, respect slide right here. You were
All right.
asking, yeah. Mhm.
Yes, perfect. Okay. All right.
Okay.
Yep. No worries. All right.
Thank you.
So, all right. So I was talking about how can you use purpose to demotivate people, right? So when we talk about integrity, set company values and behaviors for people to live by, right? Like integrity, communication, respect, and excellence. They're all really great things, but they're really, really generic, which means they lose any meaning. And in addition, you can make sure it's painfully clear that those rules, they don't really apply to senior leaders, only to the underlings and the peasants. Now, these values, integrity, communication, respect, and excellence, that are company values of Enron. And Enron was a $100 billion energy company that defrauded their clients and investors on a massive scale. And ultimately, their leaders went to jail. And they declared bankruptcy back in 2001. All right, so now it's your turn. Let's talk about mastery and autonomy. If you can put in the in the Q&A box, what do you think? What would you do to demotivate people using mastery and autonomy? And as a reminder, mastery is a desire to get better at something that matters to you. And autonomy is a desire to direct your own life, be in control of your own destiny.
Okay, we have one response so far, and it is implement several unnecessary layers of review.
Yes, absolutely. That is a good one. Yes.
Another one is don't make room for people to grow in their careers.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Another one is force people into a box based on what they're good at.
All right. Wow, we got some evil people in the audience.
Yes, micromanage others.
Absolutely.
They
Yes.
encourage professional development, but don't fund it.
Absolutely. Yes. That's a classic. Yes.
Not giving people an opportunity to practice or get better. No stretch goals. Another one is take credit for other people's accomplishment.
Oh, yes. Yes. Absolutely. Yep. And I think the commonality in some of these, so autonomy, that's really the area of micromanagement, bureaucracy, and so on, right? But if you summarize these things, sort of the overall way to do it is you want to make sure that people feel like they can't be trusted. and that you think they're accidentally going to burn the place to the ground if you're not really like watching them like a hawk all the time. See, so my guess, especially seeing how easy it is to come up with such a list, since you've all personally experienced some of these behaviors at some point in your career, and that it hurt when it happened. See, these negative experiences, they're everywhere. It doesn't really matter if you work for a small or a large organization, public, private, nonprofit. It's also not just something that others do to us. I'm sure we have all done some of these things to our folks in our projects at some point. I know that I have. It was by accident, but still, it happened. And to make it even worse, we also do it to ourselves. Let me give you an example of something we've all done at some point or another. So what do you need to do when you need to solve a problem or make a decision? You call a meeting. You get a bunch of people together, you talk through things, and in the meeting, you go off on a tangent, you run out of time, and since you didn't really take any good notes, we forgot what we talked about, no action was taken, so we call another meeting. And because of this, your calendar is filled with back-to-back-to-back meetings, and you do your actual job in the evening. Congratulations, you've created your very own negative experience. Now, why do we fall into this trap? So you think the root of it is that we often choose the easy way out. And I call it the easy way since it doesn't really require a lot of upfront thought or effort. It's the default, it's the autopilot, and it still feels like you're being productive because you're just so busy all the time. So we don't do this because we're evil or lazy or stupid. We do this because it's what everybody else does. And it's what you were probably trained to do. It's completely unintentional. Now, you may be thinking at this point, like, okay, I get it, Steven. You're like, negative experiences, they're everywhere. And it's not great, but why are you making such a big deal out of this? So to explain this, I'd like to draw out a parallel here to the work of Dr. John. He's a relationship psychologist that has studied interaction between married couples for over 30 years. And he's found this remarkably accurate way to predict whether or not a couple would stay married or get divorced. See, the couples that stayed together had at least a 5-to-1 ratio of positive to negative interactions. This means 5 times as many compliments, 5 times of me taking the time to truly listen to my wife, 5 back rubs or whatever way I, show appreciation to her. 5 of those for every time I ignore my wife or I don't listen or I do or say something stupid. And trust me, that happens all the time. Now, I believe we can translate this to the world of work. So let me give you an example here. With COVID, companies built a lot of goodwill with their office workers early on in the pandemic. People felt like their company cared for their well-being because they sent everybody to work from home. They felt like the company cared for their customers and they found all sorts of new ways to serve their customers. And people felt like their managers cared for them by offering flexibility and trying to stay connected as a team through Zoom happy hours and, things along those lines. And all of this was reflected in employee engagement scores that are going way up. But then companies completely destroyed all of that goodwill in seconds by creating these very vague return to office plans. There's no clear, convincing explanation of why we're doing this. The how and the when, they keep changing, which creates a lot of uncertainty. You worked from home for the last 2 years. You delivered some awesome results, but now all of a sudden you're expected to return to the office on a schedule that you have little or no input on. So what's the message being sent here, right? This is making people feel like the company doesn't trust them to set their schedule, do the right thing, and deliver results. So the exercise, remember the exercise we just did earlier on ways to demotivate people? We couldn't have come up with a better example than this very one. So needless to say, this results in a very negative experience. Even to the extent that some studies are showing that 40% of people are ready to leave their job, and we coined the term the Great Resignation. So the takeaway here seems a little bit counterintuitive at first. It's to focus on the negative experience in the workplace. See, because of this 5-to-1 ratio, the negative experiences have a relatively bigger impact than the positive ones. Therefore, rather than focus on increasing the positive, I want to focus on reducing the negative ones. So far, we've established that negative experiences, they're everywhere. Trying to reduce them can have a massive impact. So let's switch gears and look at what can we actually do. So as we saw earlier, it's very easy to come up with a laundry list of negative experiences. And I'm convinced that if you sat down, you could also come up with a list of ideas on how to tackle them. And those ideas would fall somewhere on this scale. There's a number of things that are in your direct control that you can change. There's a number of things you can influence, but you don't have direct control over. For instance, a meeting that your boss is hosting. And there's a number of things that are just really not in your sphere of control, right? Like overall company strategy or laws and regulations. But I do want to take a little sidestep here. Like I said, I'm a coach. I coach people like you and me. One of the things I hear all the time is, I can't do anything about that. I can't influence that. It is what it is. And without fail, every time I challenge that and I go a little deeper, there's always something we can do. May not solve world hunger, but there's always steps we can take in the right direction. It's really a matter of perspective and time horizon. See, Martin Luther King had a massive impact on the civil rights movement, and that work's by no means done. There's still a long way to go. And I'm sure he had many moments of doubt and frustration about the pace of change. But he didn't say, I can't do anything about that. He said, I have a dream. In fact, I really like this quote of Martin Luther King. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. So if you're working on something you believe in, keep chipping away at it. Showing up, being persistent, those are really the keys to progress over time. Think about how can you get one number higher on this scale? What's the next step to take? Who do you need to work with? What help do you need? It's not easy. I'm not saying that by any means. There's some real roadblocks here. And I want to talk about the number one thing I hear all the time that leads to creating new unintended negative experiences. It makes us tolerate existing negative experiences, and it prevents us from actively working to reduce negative experiences. See, all my coaching clients, they tell me at some point, Steven, I just don't have time. I'm up to my eyeballs in my day-to-day work. I really don't have time to drive change. And I get it. I understand it, especially for project managers. In projects, you're always working towards your next milestone, your next deadline, and you know at some point your project is going to end. So even if something's not all that great, you probably suck it up. I know I've done that in the past, totally understand. But I want to tell you a little story about my client, Mary, her real name. So she leads a small team that works on open innovation, which means she partners with startups, nonprofits, and so on new innovation and new product ideas. And when she started this was a new territory for the company she works for. So there was no process. She and her team had to just figure it out. But now we're a year down the line and they've built up some experience, but the experience is all in people's heads. And while it kind of works, it's still very inefficient. They've delivered great results and the volume of work is growing. So they hired a bunch of new people to help them out. But the challenge they have now is that the new people, they're too reliant on Mary and the original team because there is no process. There's no clear roles and responsibilities. And the new people they brought in don't feel comfortable taking the lead or making decisions. It's creating this negative experience all around. The existing team, they're stressed and overloaded. And the new folks, they're frustrated because all the know-how is in the other people's heads and they don't have the time to share. Mary's original approach was to document the overall process in detail, and she'd made several attempts to do so. But she never really got anywhere since there were always more pressing immediate things that she had to prioritize. See, the problem with her approach is that it was too big of a chunk to bite off. The intention is great, but intention is not enough. This way, it's just never going to get done just due to the current workload. So I asked her to reframe the problem. What is the smallest step you can take to help you free up 1 hour per week to focus on deeper work? And once you do that, repeat the process. How can you use that hour to free up the next hour and the next and the next? See, it creates this sort of self-reinforcing loop, a flywheel that starts slowly, but it starts spinning faster and faster. And as an added bonus, people will see some small early wins, which will increase their appetite to work on it. Like, let's do more of this. And will help win over some of the more skeptical folks. So in Mary's case, the very first thing she did is they used to report out the 3 separate leadership meetings, and they were able to combine 2 of them, and they were able to standardize the material across the remaining meetings. So it greatly reduced the amount of preparation time they had to put in every week. As you can see, this is not earth-shattering, but addressing this small negative experience really created some space to get the ball rolling and work on some bigger things. So the takeaway is to start with the smallest step you can take, because that'll lead you to the next and the next and the next. And often the smallest step to take is to address a negative experience. Now, I did mention a second ago the dreaded M word, meetings. Ugh. What to do about meetings. Meeting overload is something we're all familiar with. I've absolutely experienced it myself. I hear it all the time from my clients. And it's not just that there's too many meetings, but it's worse. Mostly they're not very effective. So the basic advice of good meeting hygiene is pretty straightforward. I'm not really going to tell you anything new here. It's quantity down, quality up. The quantity down, I mean, reduce the frequency of the meeting, reduce duration, reduce the number of attendees. Quality up means a clear agenda, clear goal, concise meeting minutes with actions. And in the meeting, make sure you stay on topic, stay on time, make sure that everybody's heard and it's not just the loudest or most senior folks doing the talking. See, this is great if it's your meeting and you're in control. What if it's your boss's meeting or it's something you can't change? For instance, it's a meeting format demanded by a client. I know this can really be a sensitive topic, right? You can't just go to your boss and say, hey boss, that meeting of yours really sucks. Can we just kill it? But from my experience, the people on the receiving end, they are just as frustrated. They're frustrated with the lack of participation. They're frustrated because they're not getting the information they're looking for. And they're not getting the outcome of the meeting that they would like. They just don't really know what to do about it, or it's not high enough on their priority list to do something about it. So if you approach it well, they can be quite open to your ideas. So again, here, think of what's the smallest step you can take to reduce the negative experience. On the quantity side, can we meet every other week rather than weekly? Can we do half an hour instead of an hour? Can we look at the invitee list and reduce the invitees? Can we reduce the amount of pre-meetings? I've been in projects where there's 3 layers of pre-meetings before something is presented to executives, which always used to blow my mind because the material would be completely watered down and outdated by the time it actually got to the execs. Can we reduce the material? Been in projects with massive number of slides in the appendix. Because somebody asked for something 3 years ago, but that person left the company, nobody's looked at it since, but we still prepare it every single week. If you think about the hours spent per year prepping material that nobody actually ever reads, it's crazy. On the quality side, can you manage the agenda? Can you facilitate the meeting? The takeaway is to put yourself in the shoes of the audience and the organizer. Try to think of what are their goals and offer them to help them meet their goals. And use that as an opportunity to stomp out some of the negative experiences in the process. I do want to touch specifically on hybrid meetings as well, because that's what we're all doing nowadays. What I mean is a meeting where some folks are together in a room and others are remote. See, if you've been the remote one in one of these meetings, I'm sure you'll agree it can be very difficult to follow the conversation, let alone contribute to the conversation. Do you think that people in the room purposely set out to treat you like a second-class participant? No, of course not. Again, it's unintentional because we didn't really think through it. So here's what you can do. Think of who's invited. How will they join? Put yourselves in the shoes of the person with the worst situation. The person that's joining remotely at 5 in the morning their time. Think of how we can make sure that they can fully participate. Designate one person in the room as the advocate for remote participants. The role of the advocate is to ensure the remote participants are heard. They should ensure that there's pauses in the flow of the conversation so remote folks can chime in. And the remote folks, they can message or text them in case they have issues following the conversation, like they can't hear, or they have issues interjecting, adding their perspective. And in bigger meetings, this can be part of a facilitator role. Create a shared online workspace. Use the technology to level the playing field. We're all on Zoom. Use online tools for collaboration, like shared documents in Google Docs or a Word document in Teams. Use virtual whiteboards, not real whiteboards in the room. You have dedicated tools like Mural and Miro, and most video conferencing apps nowadays have this built in as well. This will take a little bit of getting used to, but the advantage is actually that everything is already documenting in tools rather than just a pile of sticky notes or a picture taken off a whiteboard. I started this talk with a story about my experience starting a new company. Shared how I felt I was not important, how I was a nuisance to people, getting in the way of them, and how it left me feeling deflated. So what could they have done better? Well, there's a lot of things they could have done better, but there's really just one small thing that would have made all the difference in the world. All they had to do is add a little personal touch, a little note from the hiring manager welcoming me. That's it. Of course, the laptop issues, the desk, all the other things, they're super frustrating. But it's the feeling that they didn't really care or make an effort. That's the part that gets me. So a little personal note would have taken them 5 minutes to write, not even. And it would have made such a big difference. Because remember, whatever role you have and whatever organization you work for, you're in the people business. People want to feel somebody cares for them and that someone is listening to their needs. All right, we talked about a lot of things. So let's summarize and wrap this up. We've seen that negative experiences, they're everywhere, and working on reducing them can have a massive impact. So if your intention is to stomp out negative experiences, get the ball rolling. Be realistic. Don't try to boil the ocean. Start small. Create some momentum and then be persistent. Just keep plugging away at it. Show empathy. Put yourself in the other person's shoes. Try to understand their goals, their challenges, their frustrations. I believe 95% of people, they come to work to do a good job, but they may have a different definition of what a good job actually is, and they likely have a different set of goals and priorities. So offer to help them meet their goals and use that as an opportunity to address some of the negative experiences in the process. Stay humble. As an audience, I think all of you're pretty smart. After all, you chose to spend your last half hour of your life, of your precious time, listening to me. So you got to be really smart. But still, you don't have all the answers. And that's okay, because nobody does. Nobody expects you to have all the answers. You're just the one to get the ball rolling. Now, I hope I've convinced you to join my mission to stomp out everyday negative experiences in the workplace. I can tell you from my personal experience, it does take upfront effort, but it's helped me deliver better results at a sustainable pace with people that love working on my projects. And I'm convinced it can do the same for you. Thank you for your time and attention.
Oh, thank you so much, Stephen, for this very insightful presentation. I felt as though you were speaking directly to me.
All right, that's the goal.
Okay. As more and more of us are being transitioned from the virtual environment to the traditional brick and mortar environment, we're hearing that creativity and innovation thrive more in face-to-face environments versus virtual environments. What are your thoughts on this?
That's a very difficult question. I would challenge, because there's actually little or no research to back that up. I know that's the feeling that a lot of people use, that a lot of people have. And I want to be clear, I think there's a lot of added value of getting people together from time to time, if at all possible. But I think the way it's being implemented in a lot of companies today, like you need to be in the office 3 days a week or something along those lines, that there's not a really good story behind that. So I think if you can shape it, that you come together once a quarter or something along those lines, but then have a dedicated day, 2 days, whatever you're doing, and you're purely focused on improving the process or learning together or doing something outside of what you would normally do on a day-to-day basis, yes, that I think is the way to do it. But forcing people to come to the office certain days a week. And the reality is then they're just going to sit on Zoom or whatever you use with a bunch of people that are not in the office the same day. I don't really see the point in that, to be quite honest.
Thank you. Thank you. As more and more millennials and Gen Zs join the workforce, what advice would you give project and program managers in terms of attracting and retaining those two generational cohorts?
Sure. Yep. Yeah, I think I kind of mentioned it in part of my talk. I think in general, people, they want to feel like somebody cares for them, right? They want to feel that they're respected, that somebody's listening to their ideas, they're listening to their needs. They want to feel heard. And I think that applies to all generations, whether you have people that are straight out of college, just entering the workforce, whether they've been there 5 years, 10 years, whether they're a year away from retiring. Honestly, I think that is the main thing. And one of the things you'll see with more folks that are just entering the workforce, they may have some challenges because the way the education system works and the way what they've learned in the education system, there tends to be there's a right answer and there's a wrong answer, and that's why you got an A or not an A on your test. In real life, in companies, that's not how companies work, right? So I think that's why sometimes people sort of struggle with their transition into the work life. And then on the manager side, I would say it's also very much on the manager to keep giving feedback, keep working with that person, because I've seen that a lot of managers, they don't give nearly the amount of feedback, or the feedback we give is negative feedback, like, oh, you didn't do this well, you should improve that, rather than say, hey, you did a really good job in that meeting. Like the little pats on the back, the little positive things, that they go a long way, so people know that they're on the right path.
Can I jump in? Can you hear me?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I just have a quick question. I love the presentation. First of all,
Mm-hmm.
I love it. I love it. I love it. So the question is, you said stay humble, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the things that you recommend. But for young folks like me, entering the industry, there's a fine line between, staying humble, but at the same time losing people's respect. I don't know how to say this, but how do you recommend balancing that? Being humble, friendly, but at the same time earning the respect. And I'm not talking
Sure.
about work, about the quality of work. I'm just saying, socially at
Yeah.
the workplace.
No, I think that's a great question. Thank you for that. So because it's an important clarification. When I say stay humble, my main thought or main focus on that is you're not expected to have all the answers, right? Sometimes when people one of the bad pieces of management advice, or that you hear often, I would say, and I'll come back to your question, is don't bring me a problem, bring me a solution, right? Like you're expected to have the answer. I don't think that's how it really works in real life. That's not the best approach, because I may be struggling to come up with the solution, and the time that is spent coming up with the solution, your manager could have helped you, break through barriers, right? So that's, I think, one of the many pieces of sort of standard management advice that's out there that's quite harmful. But specifically, I would say the stay humble is try to stay interested in the other person, right? So it's not to say like I'm not expecting anybody to act like a doormat and people can walk all over them, but people will be very interested if you're truly interested in trying to learn from them. Like what's going on there what's going on there in their world, what are their goals work-wise and whatnot, right? People like to talk. So being humble is also giving them the space to actually listen to them, and I think that way that could be a very good way to still show up, and by seeing that somebody that actually cares about them, that
Paula, did we lose audio again?
I feel like we did. Steven, can you hear us?
I can hear you fine. Can you hear me?
Okay.
Yeah, we lost your audio for a minute there. We have another question in the Q&A.
All right.
Let's see. It is, many are expressing virtual meeting fatigue. So many are just listening in virtual meetings because they are off camera and multitasking. It isn't the loudest or most senior only speaking. It is the same few who are on camera and engaged while others are just listening.
Yes.
How do we go about changing this?
Yep. No, and that's a perfect example of what some of the things that I was talking about. So I can give you an example of what I've done in past lives, in past past roles. So one of the things I would have, I would lead a team. I would have about 50 project managers under me. And when I joined the company, you know, the one that I was talking about, when, you know, with the row of cubes and all that good stuff. When I joined that company, there was the culture that there was a meeting where we talk about project status every week, right? So we'd have a 2-hour meeting, and people would be presenting project status to, well, my predecessor and then me when I took over, right? Which basically means there's 49 people sitting silently. There's one person talking to me, and I'm asking them questions and whatnot, right? So that was one of the first things that I actually changed, because I think it's a waste of time for the 49 people that are sitting there, right? So I think if that is the case, so if you're in being pulled into a lot of meetings that you either don't have any added value, try to do something about it, right? But sometimes it can be difficult, and that's why I was suggesting, like, can you reduce that meeting? Can you reduce the invitee list, right? If you're not critical on that meeting, can we say, hey, can I just get a copy of the slides or the minutes afterwards, but I don't need to be a participant in that meeting. And sometimes I've seen it's tough, because I've seen in some companies that the culture is that, yes, we like to have this big, massive meetings where there's some higher up person, and then there's 100 people on the line waiting until that person may or may not have a question for them. And that can be very, very frustrating. So I understand it's a very difficult thing to address.
We have a comment followed by a question. It's important for new hires to be welcome and have a sense of belonging. We have
Yes.
used informal peer-to-peer one-on-ones that help new hires get to know one another and get up to speed. It's important for leaders to introduce and support this technique. What are your thoughts on this?
Yes, completely. 100% agree with that. Yes. In fact, one of the things I've seen that work pretty well is that you would assign multiple people as a sometimes you use the term buddy or partner with them, and one is more focused on, I can help you with some of the hard skills, like, oh, this is the project management template we use, or these are the templates, and if you have those type of questions. But especially in bigger companies where people are spread out over multiple sites, then we would have a different person, because that person would be physically located where they are, so they can, like, oh, that's where the break room is. This is where, you know, you get lunch and those type of things, right? So you absolutely, I think that goes a long way. But that's also it needs to be implemented well, because that's what happened to me in my example. There was such a buddy assigned, but that person wasn't properly, you know, they didn't have the time, they weren't properly briefed on what do we need to tell Stephen, and, you know, those type of things. So absolutely, if it's done well, yes, absolutely, should absolutely do that. Yes.
I know one of the comments that came up when we went through the negative exercise that you had us participate in was reward good work with more work. As a coach, what advice would you give to someone who is facing that challenge constantly? They do great work and they constantly keep getting more work.
All right. Well, that's simple, right? Just screw it up and then you won't get more work. No, that's obviously, that's the unfortunate thing. I make that joke sometimes, but in reality, it is a tough one, right? The question is really should go back to the management, and it's hard to answer this in sort of generic terms. Ideally, you would just go back to your manager who's assigning you the more work and say, hey, I have 150% worth of effort on my plate. I can only do 100%. What can you take off my plate, or what's the priorities? So we can. What are the 2 or 3 things that at the end of the year when we do a review? What are the 2 or 3 things that you'll actually expect? Well, that are the main things that you expect to have done. So we can do more of that and a little less focus on the other side. But I also know that's often easier said than done because at the moment the job market's very tight. So people or companies are looking for folks, and often that means that other folks that are still there end up taking a bigger piece of the load. So I do. It's hard to give an answer in without sort of knowing more of the details. But that's the main thing that you would do. But it's hard if your manager is not responsive to that, or they can be responsive because they don't have the folks.
Okay.
I have a quick question that was sent to me to the host privately. I'm just going to share it with everyone. I know we don't have time, but how would you approach a negative person who constantly brings the team down?
Sure. Really good question, because that also happens all the time. So again, very difficult to give a very generic answer. It really depends what's behind it, why they are negative, right? So I would say in general, if people show emotion in the workplace, it could be negative, it could be they're getting angry, or they're upset with something, and so on. Any emotion, even if the emotion is negatively perceived, is actually a good thing, because usually it's still a sign that they actually care, right? And if they care, they just don't agree with the direction and they care, now you have something you can work with. Probably the worst situation if they're like, yeah, whatever, this is not going to work, and it's more like they're checked out, they're complete apathy, and so on, right? And it's really hard to answer with the generics, but try to find what are the pieces that they care about, or there's always something behind it. Why are they being negative? And sometimes it could be like they're being very sarcastic and have a sense of humor that just doesn't really jive very well with the rest of the team. Right? You want to try to figure out what's behind it. But if it's not working, again, this could be one of the examples where you're a project, so you just sort of suck it up because in 3 months the project's going to be done. But if it's longer term, it has a more detrimental impact. See if you can replace that person on the project, which again may not always be possible.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much, Stephen, for your outstanding presentation. I knew from the title that it was going to be very interesting, and it actually exceeded my expectations. And I do want to thank you on behalf of our attendees and on behalf of the University of Maryland Project Management Symposium organizers. It has been an indeed pleasure having you here with us. I feel as though I have spent the last 45 to 50 minutes in the presence of greatness. I knew that I had heard you speak before, but then I figured out where it was. It was the WBEX Summit, Coaching Summit. And
Okay.
yes, I'm so happy to have had the opportunity to moderate your session. So thank you so much for being here with us.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much. Thanks everybody for their time and attention, and enjoy the rest of your conference.
Yes, thank you. And attendees, if you would please kindly complete the session evaluations, because we really appreciate your feedback, and we are going to use your feedback to continue to bring you wonderful content as we've been doing in the past and during our sessions thus far this year. So please complete your session evaluations and join us back here in the federal program track at 2 o'clock for our next session